How's it going? I was gonna do a bunch of stuff and then I forgot what I was doing. Uh, stream. I was messing with the chat stream stuff, so. Um, let's see. What was I doing today? I was spending too much time on social media arguing with people. And then I went to go mess around with YouTube chat rooms so that it would work. And then I redid my entire OBS scene structure. I'm an idiot. But that's fine. Still setting up stuff. I wonder what happens if I mess around with this thing. Don't worry about. Eh. Oh, I like that. You can group stuff together. Uh, another group. I like groups. No. That's not supposed to go there. Get out of there. Wait. Yeah, whatever. So what this means is that means I can do multiple media sources. I can play it. It keeps. Why is it cutting itself out? I got it. That's fine. It's fine, I guess. I had a couple of things that I wanted to do today. What did I want to do? Oh! Oh! I remember what I want to do. Hang on. I got something for y'all. As soon as I can figure out what I did with it. A little sketchy how I'm doing this one. Don't worry about it. Alright, I got a bunch of game codes here from Amazon Prime. And I also have some advertisements for myself. Where are we? My referral codes are shit. They're not as cool as they could be, but where are we? Where are we? Verify whether or not anybody actually gets these. I'm just gonna put them up there and then hope somebody takes them, you know? Let's transition over. Take a look. Alright, so I got a code. First person to grab them gets them. These are on goodoldgames.com. Evil Within 2. Beat Cop. And then if you got Candy Crush or Candy Crush Soda, Soda Saga, here are some QR codes for you. Also, for me specifically, if you guys have a need for... Oh, I remember what I was going to do. What I was going to do was I was actually going to set up my website today. But I took so long setting up YouTube chat, I kind of really don't want to. I'll do that next time. Anyway, if you have a want for a hosting referral code, get 75% off on hostinger.com using this referral code. Or Athletic Greens, this green stuff that I drink, with D3K2 and 5 free travel packs. If you want a tip, that's how you tip me. I should probably actually use an actual tipping service instead of just giving out my PayPal. But, you know. See how that goes. Better after it's refrigerated. I will have more codes later. There was actually a lot of codes here. I will show some more at the end of the stream. A lot of these other are just game packs after that. Not actual games. So, you know. If you're into that, by the way, if you actually play those games, let me know how they are. I don't actually support the games that I'm giving out. They just happen to be on Amazon Prime, and they are codes that I will never use. So better give them out than to let them go to waste. So, what do I want to do? I kind of want to do something before I actually go play games. But I don't want to keep talking about politics because it's gotten me riled up as hell. I want to just enjoy myself, I guess. Although, I could read about politics. I get the feeling I'm going to need to know the stuff in this book. Find a book. Ooh. Wait, I don't need a bookmark. This has got a... This is my American Bible here. And by American Bible, I mean the Constitution of the United States of America, and selected writings of the Founding Fathers. I actually have not read this all the way through. I've always intended to. So I'll get some of the way in through there, I guess. We will talk about some Constitution shit. Ooh, holy crap. There's a whole introduction before we even get to the Constitution. There's so much here. What's in the introduction? This is going to be a lot of shit to get through. Yeah, I'm not going to read this. This introduction's bullshit. Oh. Why doesn't that do both at the same time? Whatever. Whatever. Alright, let's see. Where do we begin? February 1761. On the Writs of Assistance by James Otis. Oh my god. May it please your honors. I was desired by one of the court to look into the books and consider the question now before them concerning writs of assistance. I have accordingly considered it, and now appear not only in obedience to your order, but likewise in behalf of the inhabitants of this town, who have presented another petition, and out of regard to the liberties of the subject. And I take this opportunity to declare, that whether under a fee or not, for in such a cause as I despise a fee, I will to my dying day oppose, with all the powers and faculties God has given me, all such instruments of slavery on the one hand and villainy on the other, as this writ of assistance. Oh my god, really? This is messed up. It appears to me that the worst instrument of arbitrary power, the most destructive of English liberty, and the fundamental principles of law that ever was found in an English law book. I must therefore beg your honor's patience and attention to the whole range of an argument that may perhaps appear uncommon in many things, as well as the points of learning that are more remote and unusual, that the whole tendency of my design may the more easily be perceived, the conclusion better descend, and the force of them the better felt. I shall not think much of my pains in this cause, as I engaged in it from principle. I was solicited to argue this case as Advocate General, and, because I would not, I have been charged with desertion from my office. To this charge I can give a very sufficient answer. I renounce that office, and I argue this cause from the same principle. And I argue it with the greater pleasure as it is in favor of British liberty. At a time when we hear the greatest monarchs upon earth declare... What? Really? Lord Jesus Christ. Come on. Come on. Roxy, come on. You can get up here or not? Get up here or not? What do you want? What do you want? It's got to be on her time, right? I'm going to lock this camera. Unlock the camera. Oh, ah! Your claws, dude. Put them away. I forgot where I was. I renounce that office, and I argue this cause from the same principle, and I argue it with the greater pleasure as it is in favor of British liberty. At a time when we hear
the greatest monarch upon earth declaring from his throne that he glories in the name of Britain, and that the privileges of his people are dearer to him than the most valuable prerogatives of his crown. And as it is, in opposition to a kind of power, the exercise of which in former periods of history cost one king of England his head, and another his crown. I have taken more pains in this cause than I will ever take again, although my engaging in this and another popular cause has raised much resentment. But I think I can sincerely declare that I cheerfully submit myself to every odious name for conscience sake. And from my soul I despise all those whose guilt, malice, or folly has made them my foes. Let the consequences be what they will, I am determined to proceed. The only principles of public conduct that are worthy of a gentleman or a man are to sacrifice estate, ease, health, and applause, and even life to the sacred cause of his country. These many manly sentiments in private life make good citizens in public life, the patriot and the hero. I do not say that, when brought to the test, I shall be invincible. I pray to God I may never be brought to the melancholy trial. But if ever I should, it will then be known how far I can reduce to practice principles which I know to be founded in truth. In the meantime, I will proceed to the subject of this writ. In the first place, may it please your honors, I will admit that writs of one kind may be legal, that is, special writs directed to special officers, and certain houses, etc., specially set forth in the writ, may be granted by the court of exchequer at home. Exchequer? What the fuck is exchequer? Where'd my browser go? I know I had a browser open. Roxy, where'd you put my browser? Dude, really? You know I don't got pants on. Many do, but they're so. X check arrayed. Where did I put my glasses? Exchequer. Exchequer. The bank account in which tax receipts and other public monies are paid. The funds of the British government. Exchequer. So, the National Treasury. May be granted by the court of exchequer at home upon oath made before the Lord Treasurer by the person who asks it, that he suspects such goods to be concealed in those very places he desires to search. The Act 14 Charles II, which Mr. Gridley mentions, proves this, and in this light the writ appears like a warrant from a justice of the peace to search for stolen goods. Your honors will find in the old books concerning the office of a justice of the peace precedents of general warrants to search suspected houses. But in more modern books you will find only special warrants to search such and such houses, specially named, in which the complainant has before sworn that he suspects his goods are concealed, and will find it adjudged that special warrants only are legal. In the same manner I rely on it that the writ prayed for. Well, screw you too, cat. In the same manner I rely on it that the writ prayed for in this petition is illegal. It is a power that places the liberty of every man in the hands of every petty officer. I admit that special writs of assistance to search special places may be granted to certain persons on oath. Really? Make up your friggin' mind, dude. Come on. No? It's this cat. I admit that special writs of assistance to search special places may be granted to certain persons on oath, but I deny that the writ now prayed for can be granted. For I beg leave to make some observations on the writ itself before I proceed to other acts of Parliament. In the first place, the writ is universal, being directed to all and singular justices, sheriffs, constables, and all other officers and subjects, so that, in short, it is directed to every subject in the king's domains. Everyone with this writ may be a tyrant. If this commission be legal, a tyrant in a legal manner also may control, imprison, or murder any one within the realm. In the next place, it is perpetual. There is no return. A man is accountable to no person for his doings. Every man may reign secure in his petty tyranny, and spread terror and desolation around him until the trump of the archangel shall excite different emotions in his soul. In the third place, a person with this writ in the daytime may enter all houses, shops, etc., at will, and command all to assist him. Fourthly, by this writ, not only deputies, etc., but even their menial servants are allowed to lord it over us. What is this but to have the curse of Canaan, with a witness on us? To be the servants of servants, the most despicable of God's creation? Now, one of the most essential branches of English liberty is the freedom of one's house. A man's house is his castle, and whilst he is quiet, he is as well guarded as a prince in his castle. This writ, if it should be declared legal, would totally annihilate this privilege. Custom house officers may enter our houses when they please. We are commanded to permit their entry. Their menial servants may enter, may break locks, bars, and everything in their way, and whether they break through the malice or revenge, no man, no court, can inquire. Bare suspicion without oath is sufficient. This wanton exercise of this power is not a chimerical suggestion of a heated brain. I'll mention some facts. Mr. Pugh had one of those writs, and when Mr. Ware succeeded him, he endorsed this writ over to Mr. Ware, so that these writs are negotiable from one officer to another. And so your honors have no opportunity of judging the persons to whom this vast power is delegated. Another instance is this. Mr. Justice Wally had called the same Mr. Ware before him by a constable for a breach of the Sabbath Day Acts, or that of profane swearing. As soon as he had finished, Mr. Ware asked him if he had done. He replied, yes. Well then, said Mr. Ware, I'll show you a little of my power. I commanded you to permit me to search your house for uncustomed goods, and went on to search the house from garret to cellar, and then serve the constable in the same manner. But to show another absurdity in this writ, if it should be established, I insist upon every person, by the 14th Charles II, that this power, as well as the custom house officers. The words are, it shall be lawful for any person or persons authorized, etc. What a scene this is open! Every man, prompted by revenge, ill humor, or wantonness to inspect the inside of his neighbor's house, may get a writ of assistance. Others will ask it from self-defense. One arbitrary exertion will provoke another, until society be involved in tumult and in blood. Again, these writs are not returned. Writs in their nature are temporary things. when the purposes for they are issued are answered. They exist no more, but these live forever. No one can be called to account. Thus, reason and the Constitution are both against this writ. Let us see what authority there is for it. Not more than one instance can be found of it in all our law books, and that was in the zenith of arbitrary power, namely in the reign of Charles II, when Star Chamber powers were pushed to extremity by some ignorant clerk of the Exchequer. But had this writ been in any book whatever, it would have been illegal. All precedents are under the control of the principles of law. Lord Talbot says it is better to observe these than any precedents. Oi, 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 oi. Though in the House of Lords, last resort of the subject, no Acts of Parliament can establish such a writ, though it should be made in the very words of the petition. It will be void. An act against the Constitution is void. But this proves no more than what I before observed, that special writs may be granted on oath and probable suspicion. The Act of 7 and 8, William III, that officers of the plantation shall have the same power, etc., is confined to this sense, that an officer should show probable ground, should take his oath of it, should do this before a magistrate, and that such magistrate, if he think proper, should issue a special warrant to a constable to search the places. That of 6 and can prove no more. Ah! Oh, that was so much. Oh. Why did he write so much about this? It was so wordy. He was just saying that writs of citizens suck. On the Stamp Act by James Otis. Delivered before Governor and Council in Boston, December 20th, 1765. It is with great grief that I appear before your Excellency and honors on this occasion. A wicked and unfeeling minister has caused the people, the most loyal and affectionate that ever king was blessed with, to groan under the most insupportable oppression, but I think, sir, that he now stands upon the brink of inevitable destruction, and trust that soon, very soon, he will feel the full weight of his injured sovereign's righteous indignation. I have no doubt, sir, but that the loyal and dutiful representation of the 9 provinces, the cries and supplications of a distressed people, united voice of all of His Majesty's most loyal and affectionate British American subjects, will obtain all that ample redress which they have a right to expect, and that ere long they will see the cruel and insidious enemies both at home and abroad put to shame and confusion. My brother Adams has entered so largely into the validity of the act that I shall not enlarge on that head. Indeed, what has been observed is sufficient to convince the most illiterate savage that the Parliament of England had no regard to the very first principles of their own liberties. Only the preamble of what that oppressive act is enough to rouse the blood of every generous Briton. We, your Majesty's subjects, the Commons of Great Britain, etc., do give and grant. What? Your own property? No! The treasure, the heart's blood of all your Majesty's dutiful and affectionate British American subjects. But the time's far spent, I will not tire your patience. It was once a fundamental maxim that every subject had the same right to his life, liberty, property, and the law that the king had to his crown. And 'tis yet, I venture to say, as much as a crown is worth, to deny the subject his law, which is his birthright. 'Tis the first principle that majesty should not only shine in arms, but be armed with the laws. Breathing is great. The administration of justice is necessary to the very existence of governments. Nothing can warrant stopping the course of justice but the impossibility of holding courts by reason of war, invasion, rebellion, or insurrection. This law at a time when the whole island of Great Britain was divided into an infinite number of petty baronies and principalities as Germany is at this day. Insurrectionists then, and even invasions, put the whole nation into such confusion that justice could not have her equal course, especially as the kings in ancient times frequently sat as judges. But the war now becomes so much of a science and gives so little disturbance to a nation engaged that no war, foreign or domestic, is a sufficient reason for shutting up the courts. But if it were, we are not in such a state, but far otherwise, the whole people being willing and demanding the full administration of justice, the shutting up of the court in abdication, a total dissolution of government. Whoever takes from the king his executive power takes from the king his kingship. The laws which forbid a man to pursue his right one way ought to be understood with this equitable restriction, that one finds judges to whom he may apply. I can't but observe that cruel and unheard of neglect of that enemy to his king and country, the author of this act, that, when all business, the very life, and being of a commercial estate, was to be carried on by the use of stamps, that wicked and execrable minister never paid the least regard to the miseries of this extensive continent, but suffered the time for taking the place of the act to elapse months before a single stamp was received. Though this is a high piece of infidelity to the interest of his royal master, yet it makes it evident that it could never be intended that if stamps were not to be had, it should put a stop to all justice, which is, ipso facto, a dissolution of society. It is a strange kind of law which we hear advanced nowadays, that because one unpopular act can't be carried into execution, that therefore there shall be an end of all law. We are not the first people who have risen to prevent the execution of the law. The very people of England themselves rose in opposition to the famous Jew Bill. And got that immediately repealed. And lawyers know that there are limits beyond which, if parliaments go, their acts bind not. Oh my god. What is the Jew Bill? The Jew Bill, more formally an act to extend to the sect of people professing the Jewish religion the same rights and privileges enjoyed by Christians, was passed in 1826 by the Maryland General Assembly to allow Jews to hold public office in the state. Bruh, that was nearly 300 years ago and we still think like that. Oh my fucking god. Oh my god. Oh my god. The king is always presumed to be present in his courts, holding out the law to his subjects, and when he shuts his courts, he unkings himself in the most essential point. Magna Charta and the other statutes are full. They will not defer, delay, nor deny any man justice. That it shall not be commanded by the Great Seal or in any other way to disturb or delay common right. The judges of England are not to counsel or assent to anything which may turn to the damage or disaraison of the crown. They are sworn not to deny any man common right by the king's letters, nor none other man's, nor for none other cause. Is now the dissolution of society a disherition of the crown? The justices are commanded that they shall do even law and execution of right to all our subjects, rich and poor, without having regard to any person, without letting to do right for any letters or commandment which may come to them, or by any other name. What accent did Benjamin Franklin have? I don't know. On Civil War, Benjamin Franklin. To the printer of the London Public Advertiser, August 25th, 1768. Sir, 60 years did the oppressed United Provinces maintain a war in defense of their liberties against the then powerful kingdom of Spain, with all the wealth of the Indies at its command, and finally obliged to acknowledge their independency in a formal treaty, sitting down with the loss of territory, treasure, and reputation, and with a broken strength that has never since been recovered. Contractors, jobbing mercantile, members of parliament, officers starving in half pay, and gunsmith who toast, as paper tells us, a speedy and a perpetual war may wish rather than no war at all. For a civil one in America. These in all conversations to encourage us in undertaking it. Slight the strength of those distant people, think nothing of the enthusiasm for liberty, which in other countries and ages has supplied all deficiencies and enabled a weak people to baffle the efforts of a stronger, but tell us that half a dozen regiments are sufficient to reduce in less than a year every province on the continent. Half a dozen being engaged to this blessed service, it is easy to write and shew the necessity for more. The more there are, the greater the profits to those gentry. And whatever becomes of us poor devils that live by manufactures or by trade that are to pay taxes, or have money in the funds, they will amass fortunes, buy our estates, bribe our boroughs, and vote in Parliament the rectitude of the measure. I believe our officers and soldiers as brave as any in the world, and from that very opinion of their bravery, I conjecture they would not generally relish the being ordered on this murdering service against their countrymen to shed English blood, to stifle the British spirit of liberty now rising in the colonies. That liberty, which we should rather wish to see nourished and preserved there, as on a loss of it here, which from our vices is perhaps not far distant. We, or our posterity, oh, why are they all big words? May have occasion to resort to and participate of, and possibly some of the ablest officers may choose, with Sir Geoffrey Amherst, rather to resign their commissions. But whatever may be the bravery and military powers of our troops, and whatever the zeal with which they would proceed in such a war, there are reasons that make me suspect that it will not be so soon terminated as some folks would have us believe. My reasons are drawn chiefly from a computation founded on facts. It is well known that America is a country full of forests, mountains, and etc. That in such a country, a small irregular force give abundance of trouble to a regular one that is much greater. And that in the last war, one of the 15 colonies we now have there, and one far short of being the strongest, held out 5 years against 25,000 British regular troops, joined by 25,000 colonists on their own pay, and aided by a strong fleet of men of war. What the experience was to this nation, our treasury books and augmented debt may shew. The experience to America, as their pay was higher, could not be much less. The colony we made war upon was indeed aided by France. But during the whole contest, not with more than 5,000 men. Now, supposing that the 25,000 colonists that then joined us should be hereafter against us, and that this makes no difference, and considering that instead of one colony to conquer, we are to have 15, and that possibly some of our good neighbors may think of making a diversion in their favor, I apprehend it not out of the way to allow 5 years still to a colony, and this, by my computation, will amount to just 75 years. I hope, Messieurs, the company of gunsmiths will for the present be so good as to content with a civil war of 75 years, and perhaps we may scarce be able to afford them a perpetual one. And what are we to gain by this war, by which our trade and manufacturers are to be ruined, our strength divided and diminished, our debt increased, and our reputation as a generous nation and lovers of liberty given up and lost? Why are we to convert millions of the king's loyal subjects into rebels, for the sake of establishing a new claimed power in P? Paris? P? P, it just says P and then dash. To tax distant people whose abilities and circumstances they cannot be acquainted with, who have a constitutional power of taxing themselves, who have never refused to give us voluntarily more than we can ever expect to wrest from them by force, by our trade with whom we gain millions a year. And is there not one wise and good man to be found in Britain, who can propose some conciliating measure that may prevent this terrible mischief? I fear not one. For costus volt perde, dematrius. For costus volt perde? God damn it. Alright. Constitutional liberty and arbitrary power. Maybe I was talking too long. Oop. Blech. Ah! Maybe I was talking too long and it got stuck at that volume and thought I was just making noise. Constitutional liberty and arbitrary power. Joseph Warren, delivered in Boston, March 5th, 1772. When we turn over the historic page and trace... Wait, is it Boston accent? Boston. I don't remember how to do Boston accent. All I know is that they're loud. When we turn over the historic page and trace the rise and fall of states and empires, the mighty revolutions which have so often varied the face of the world, strike our minds with solemn surprise, and we are naturally led to endeavor to search out the causes of such astonishing changes. That man is formed for social life in an observation which, upon our first inquiry, presents itself immediately to our view, and our reason approves that wise and generous principle which actuated the first founders of civil government. An institution which hath its origins in the weakness of individuals, and hath for its end the strength and security of all. So long as the means of effecting this important end are thoroughly known and religiously attended to, government is one of the richest blessings to mankind, and ought to be held in the highest veneration. In young and new formed communities, the grand design of this institution is most generally understood and the most strictly guarded. The motives which urge to the social compact cannot be at once forgotten, and that equality which is remembered to have subsisted so lately among them prevents those who are clothed with authority from attempting to invade the freedom of their brethren. Or, if such an attempt be made, it prevents the community from suffering the offender to go unpunished. Every member feels it to be his interest, and knows it to be his duty to preserve. I don't think it matters. I said duty. To preserve inviolate the Constitution on which the public safety depends. And he is equally ready to assist the magistrate in the execution of the laws and the subject in the defense of his right. And so long as this noble attachment to a constitution founded on free and benevolent principles exists in full vigor, in any state, that state must be flourishing and happy. It was this noble attachment to a free constitution which raised ancient Rome from the smallest beginnings to that bright summit of happiness and glory to which she arrived, and it was the loss of this which plunged her from that summit to the black gulf of infamy and slavery. It was this attachment which inspired her senators with wisdom. It was this which glowed in the breast of her heroes. I don't know what's up with my accent today. It's not on purpose. It's just kind of doing what it wants. It was its attachment to the Constitution founded on free and benevolent principles which inspired the first settlers of this country. They saw with grief the daring outrages committed on the free Constitution of their native land. They knew nothing but a civil war could at any time restore its pristine purity. So hard was it to resolve to imbrue their hands in the blood of their brethren, that they chose rather to quit their fair possessions and seek another habitation in a distant clime. When they came to this new world, which they fairly purchased of the Indian natives, no. I mean, they might have thought that, but they were wrong. The only rightful proprietors, they cultivated the then barren soil by their incessant labor. That's a lie. And defended the dear bought possession with the fortitude of the Christian and the bravery of the hero. After various struggles which during the tyrannic reigns of the House of Stuart were constantly kept up between right and wrong, between liberty and slavery, the connections between Great Britain and this colony was settled in the reign of King William and Queen Mary by a compact, the condition of which were expressed in a charter by which all the liberties and immunities of British subjects were confided to this province, as well and as absolutely as they possibly could be by any human instrument which can be devised. And it is undeniably true that the greatest and most important right of a British subject is that he shall be governed by no laws but those to which he, either in person or by his representatives, hath given his consent, and this, I will venture to assert, is the greatest basis of British freedom. It is interwoven with the Constitution, and whenever this is lost, the Constitution must be destroyed. The British Constitution, which ours is a copy, is a happy compound of the three forms, under some of which all governments may be ranged, namely monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. Of these three, the British legislature is composed. And without the consent of each branch, nothing can carry with it the force of a law. But when a law is to be passed for raising a tax, that law can originate only in the Democratic branch, which is the House of Commons in Britain and the House of Representatives here. The reason is obvious. They and their constituents are to pay much, the largest part of it. But as the aristocratic branch, which in Britain in the House of Lords, and in this province the Council, are also to pay some part. Their consent is necessary, and as the monarchic branch, which in Britain is the king, and with us the king in person, or the governor, whom he shall be pleased to appoint in his stead, is supposed to have just a sense of his own interest, which is that of all the subjects in general. His consent is also necessary, and when the consent of these three branches is obtained, the taxation is most certainly legal. This one's interesting, this section here. It's because it's saying that the House of Representatives were supposed to be for commoners and not the aristocracy. And the Senate, which I'm assuming is what the council is, was for the aristocracy. So that we had poor people and rich people governing. In this particular case, we don't have any poor people in government. So we fucked up. Let us now allow ourselves a few moments to examine the late acts of the British Parliament for taxing America. Let us, with the candor, judge whether they are constitutionally binding upon us. If they are, in the name of justice, let us submit to them without one murmuring word. First, I would ask whether the members of the British House of Commons are the democracy of this province. If they are either the people of this province or are elected by the people of this province to represent them, and have therefore a constitutional right to originate a bill for taxing them. Dry cuticles. It is most certain that they are neither, and therefore nothing done by them can be said to be done by the democratic branch of our Constitution. I would next ask whether the Lord who compose the aristocratic branch of the legislature are peers of America. I never heard it was, even in those extraordinary times, so much as pretended, and if they are not, certainly no act of theirs can be said to be an act of the aristocratic branch of our Constitution. The power of the monarch branch we, with pleasure, acknowledge resides in the king, who may act either in person or by his representative. And I freely confess that I can see no reason why a proclamation for raising revenues in America, issued by the king's sole authority, would not be equally consistent with our own Constitution. I would next ask whether the lords who compose the aristocratic branch of the legislature are peers of America. I never heard it was, even in these extraordinary times, so much as pretended. And if they are not, certainly no act of theirs can be said to be an act of the aristocratic branch of our Constitution. The power of the monarchic branch we, with pleasure, acknowledge resides in the king, who may either act in person or by, I did repeat that, sorry, or by his representative, and I freely confess I can see no reason why a proclamation for raising revenues in America, issued by the king's sole authority, will not be equally consistent with our own Constitution.
and therefore equally binding upon us with the late acts of the British Parliament for taxing us. For it is plain that if there is any validity in those acts, it must arise altogether from the monarchical branch of the legislature, and I further think that it would be, at least, as equitable, for I do not conceive it to be of the least importance to us by whom our property is taken away, so long as it is taken without our consent. And I am very much at a loss to know by what figure of rhetoric the inhabitants of this province can be called free subjects, when they are obliged to obey implicitly such laws are made for them by men 3,000 miles off, whom they know not, and whom they never empowered to act for them, or how they can be said to have property, when a body of men over whom they have not the least control, and who are not in any way accountable to them, shall oblige them to deliver up part or the whole of their substance, without even asking their consent. And yet, whoever pretends that the late acts of the British Parliament for taxing America ought to be deemed binding upon us, must admit at once that we are absolute slaves, and have no property of our own, or else that way we may be freemen, and at the same time under the necessities of obeying the arbitrary command of those over whom we have no control or influence, and that we may have property of our own, which is entirely at the disposal of another. Such gross absurdities, I believe, will not be relished in this enlightened age. And it can be no matter of wonder that the people quickly perceived and seriously complained of the inroads which these acts must unavoidably make upon their liberty, and of the hazard to which their whole property is, by them, exposed. For if they may be taxed without their consent, even in the smallest trifle, they may also, without their consent, be deprived of everything they possess, although never so valuable, never so dear. Certainly never entered the hearts of our ancestors that after so many dangers in this then desolate wilderness, their hard-earned property should be at the disposal of the British Parliament. And as it was soon found that this taxation could not be supported by reason and argument, it seemed necessary that one act of oppression should be enforced by another, and therefore contrary to our just rights as possessing, or at least having a just title to possess, all the liberties and immunities of the British subjects and standing army was established among us in time of peace, and evidently for the purpose of effecting that, which it was one principal design of the founder of the Constitution to prevent when they declared a standing army in a time of peace to be against law, namely for the enforcement of obedience to acts which, upon fair examination, appeared to be unjust and unconstitutional. The ruinous consequences of standing armies may be seen in the histories of Syracuse, Rome, and many other once flourishing states, some of which have now scarce a name. Their baneful influence is most suddenly felt when they are placed in populous cities. For by corruption of morals, the public happiness is immediately affected, and that this is one of the effects of quartering troops in a populous city, is a truth to which many a mourning parent many a lost, despairing child in this metropolis, must bear melancholy testimony. Soldiers are also taught to consider arms as the only arbiters by which every dispute is to be decided between contending states. They are instructed implicitly to obey their commanders without inquiring into the justice of the cause they are engaged to support. Hence, it is that they are ever to be dreaded as the ready engines of tyranny and oppression. Uncle Sam does not want robots. And it is too observable that they are prone to introduce the same mode of decision in the disputes of individuals. From thence have often arisen great animosities between them and the inhabitants, who whilst naked defenseless state are frequently insulted and abused by an armed soldiery
and that this will be more especially the case when the troops are informed that the intention of their being stationed in any city is to overawe the inhabitants. Now, this was the avowed design of stationing an armed force in this town is sufficiently known, and we, my fellow citizens, have seen. We have felt the tragic effects. The fatal 5th of March, 1770, can never be forgotten. The horrors of that dreadful night are but too deeply impressed upon our hearts. Language is too feeble to paint the emotions of our souls. When our streets were stained with the blood of our brethren, when our ears were wounded by the groans of the dying, and our eyes were tormented with the sight of the mangled bodies of the dead, when our alarmed imagination presented to our view our houses wrapped in flames, our children subjected to the barbarous caprice of raging soldiery, our beauteous virgins exposed to all the insolence of unbridled passion, our virtuous wives endeared to us by every tender tie, falling a sacrifice to worse than brutal violence, and perhaps like the famed Lucretia, distracted with anguish and despair, ending their wretched lives by their own fair hands. When we beheld the authors of our distress parading in our streets, or drawing up in a regular battalion, as though in a hostile city, our hearts beat to arms. We snatched our weapons, almost resolved by one decision stroke to avenge the death of our slaughtered brethren, and secure from future danger all that we held most dear. But propitious heaven forbade the bloody carnage, and saved the threatened victims of our too keen resentment, not by their discipline, not by their regular array. No, it was Royal George's livery that provided their shield. It was that which turned the pointed engines of destruction from their breasts. The thoughts of vengeance were soon buried in our inbred affection to Great Britain, and calm reason dictated a method of removing the troops, more mild than an immediate resource to the sword. With united efforts, you urged the immediate departure of the troops from the town. You urged it with a resolution which ensured success. You obtained your wishes, and the removal of the troops was effected, without one drop of their blood being shed by the inhabitants. The immediate actors in the tragedy of that night were surrendered to justice. It is not mine to say how far they were guilty. They have been tried by the country and acquitted of murder. They are not to be again arraigned at an earthly bar. But surely the men who have promiscuously scattered death amidst the innocent inhabitants of a populous city ought to see well to it that they are prepared to stand at the bar of an omniscient judge, and all who contrived or encouraged the stationing of troops in this place have reasons of eternal importance to reflect with deep contrition on their base designs, and humbly to repent of their base machinations. The infatuation which hath seemed for a number of years to prevail in the British councils with regard to us is truly astonishing. What can be proposed by the repeated attacks made upon our freedom, I really cannot surmise. Even leaving justice and humanity out of the question, I do not know one single advantage which can arise to the British nation from our being enslaved. I know not of any gains which can be wrung from us by oppression, which they may not obtain from us by our own consent. In the smooth channel of commerce, we wish the wealthy and prosperity of Britain, we contribute largely to both. Doth what we contribute lose all its value because it's done voluntarily? The amazing increase of riches to Britain, the great rise of the value of her lands, the flourishing state of her navy are striking proofs of the advantages derived to her from her commerce with the colonies, and is our earnest desire that she may still continue to enjoy the same emoluments until the streets are paved with American gold. Only let us have the pleasure of calling it our own, while it is in our hands, but this, it seems, is too great a favor. We are to be governed by the absolute command of others. Our property is to be taken away without our consent. If we complain, our complaints are treated with contempt. If we assert our rights, that assertion is deemed insolence. If we humbly offer, submit to the matter to the impartial decision of reason, The sword is judged the most proper argument to silence our murmurs. But this cannot long be the case. Surely the British nation will not suffer the reputation of their justice and their honors to be thus sported away by capricious ministry. No. They will, in short time, open their eyes to their true interests. They nourish in their breasts the noble love of liberty. They hold her dear. And they know that all who have once possessed her charms had rather die than suffer her to be torn from their embraces. They are also sensible that Britain is so deeply interested in the prosperity of the colonies that she must eventually feel every wound given to their freedom. They cannot be ignorant that more dependence may be placed on the affections of a brother than on the forced service of a slave. They must approve your efforts for the preservation of your rights. From a sympathy of soul, they must pray for your success. And I doubt not they will ere long exert themselves effectually to redress your grievances. Even the dissolute reign of Charles II, when the House of Commons impeached the Earl of Clarendon of high treason, the first article on which they founded their accusation was that he had designed a standing army to be raised, and to govern the kingdom thereby. And the eighth article was that he had introduced an arbitrary government into his Majesty's plantation. A terrifying example to those who are now forging chains for this country. You have, my friends and countrymen, frustrated designs of your enemies by your unanimity and fortitude. It was your union and determined spirit which expelled those troops who polluted your streets with innocent blood. You have appointed this anniversary as a standard memorial of the bloody consequences of placing an armed force in a populous force, and of your deliverance from the dangers which then seemed to hang over your heads. I am confident that you will never betray the least want of spirit when called upon to guard your freedom. None but they who set a just value upon the blessings of liberty are worth to enjoy her. Your illustrious fathers were her zealous votaries. When the blasting frowns of tyranny drove her from public view, they clasped her in their arms. They cherished her in their generous bosoms. They brought her safe over the rough ocean and fixed her seat in this then dreary wilderness. They nursed her infant age with the most tender care. For her sake they patiently bore the severest hardships. For her support they underwent the most rugged toils. In her defense they boldly encountered the most alarming dangers. Neither the ravenous beast that could damp their ardor, whilst with one hand they broke the stubborn glebe. With the other they grasped their weapons, ever ready to protect her from danger. No sacrifice, not even their own blood, was esteemed too rich for a libation for her altar. God prospered their valor. They preserved her brilliancy unsullied. They enjoyed her whilst they lived, and dying, bequeathed the dear inheritance to your care. And as they left you this glorious legacy, they have undoubtedly transmitted to you some portion of their noble spirit. To inspire you with virtue to merit her and courage to preserve her, you surely cannot, with such examples before your eyes, as every page of the history of this country affords, suffer your liberties to be ravished from you by lawless force, or cajoled away by flattery and fraud. The voice of your father's blood cries to you from the ground, my sons, scorn to be slaves. In vain we met the frowns of tyrants, in vain we crossed the boisterous ocean, found a new world, and prepared it for the happy residence of liberty. In vain we toiled, in vain we fought, we bled in vain. If you, our offspring, want valor to repel the assaults of her invaders, stain not the glory of your worthy ancestors, but like them resolve never to part with your birthright. Be wise in your deliberations, and determined in your exertions for the preservation of your liberties. Follow not the dictates of passion, but enlist yourselves under the sacred banner of reason. Use every method in your power to secure your rights. At least prevent the curses of posterity from being heaped upon your memories. If you, with united zeal and fortitude, oppose the torrent of oppression, if you feel the fire of patriotism burning in your breast, if you from your souls despise the most gaudy dress that slavery can wear, if you really prefer the lonely cottage, whilst blessed with liberty, to gilded palaces, surrounded with the ensigns of slavery, you may have the fullest assurance that tyranny with her whole accursed train will hide their hideous heads in confusion, shame, and despair. If you perform your part, you must have the strongest confidence that the same Almighty Being who protected your pious and venerable forefathers, who enabled them to turn a barren wilderness into a fruitful field, who so often made bare his arms for their salvation, will still be mindful of you, their offspring. May this Almighty Being graciously preside in all our councils. May he direct us to such measures as he himself shall approve, and be pleased to bless. May we ever be a people favored of God. May our land be a land of liberty, the seat of virtue, the asylum of the oppressed, a name and a praise in the whole earth, until the last shock of time shall bury the empires of the world in one common, undistinguished ruin. How much before I get to Constitution? Oh. Articles. Ooh. Gross. It'll be a minute. It'll be a minute. How long have I been reading for? An hour? Take a break. I'll be back and read a few more sections, and then I'll play DeathStranding. Oop. Enjoy these other codes for free packages, and don't forget the other stuff. I'll be back.
Oh my god, Georgia. I don't even know why I went into that exit to begin with. Kind of stuck now. Now it won't like stay one accent either. There's one thing ramen's good for, it's heartburn. All that salt. It's not good for your heart though. It's a heartburn. Figure out a way to descale this bitch. No way I only got enough. This thing only holds enough hot water for that cup up full of coffee before. Oh. Meow. 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 What are you gonna do about it? Huh? What are you gonna do about it? You say hi. Say hi. Meow. Okay, go on. Go, go, go. Really? You're gonna do this to me? You're gonna do this to me? You little attack. attention more. Block of key highway. What is going on in Azerbaijan? Armenia. Why you do this to me, phone microphone? But yeah, we got a whole host of disease that we just don't get anymore because we fortified those cereals. Now we need to take into account all of the vitamins in our fortified cereals and grains. That might be the reason why people actually enjoy eating grains so much. The bodily craving for vitamin. If your body is craving vitamins, that is the easiest source of vitamins to get. They're basically just multivitamins with wheat and sugar. Or corn in some cases. I don't know, I think I was cuter a year into transition. What? Cat. That's what. Not gonna lie. Roasted mini wheats are good for you. It's got all that fiber, all that vitamins, and just enough sugar that it doesn't taste like ass. If you're having trouble pooping, roasted mini wheats. Yeah, I know from experience. Georgia! Georgia! Meow! Meow! Yeah, you're not gonna drink the green stuff. That's because you're a carnivore. I guess the proper term is scavenger since they're technically omnivorous, but cats and dogs are both carnivorous. That we feed them grains is kind of an hello? Hello? I don't know why it keeps doing that. It's gotta be something to do with OBS. People get upset over the weirdest things. Stop, sharing it and start sharing like actual nutritious plans instead. Otherwise, it's just gonna get around and keep propagating. If you didn't know, that's how that works.
Let's continue. I could really use a drink right now. The rights of colonists as men. Men. Remind you when I'm reading this book. The Rights of Colonists as Men by Samuel Adams. From the Committee of Correspondence to the Boston Town Meeting, November 20th, 1772. Among the natural rights for the colonists are these. First, a right to life. Second, to liberty. Thirdly, to property, together with the right to support and defend them in the best manner they can. These are evident branches of, rather than deductions from, the duty of self-preservation, commonly called the first law of nature. All men have a right to remain in a state of nature as long as they please, and in case of intolerable oppression, civil or religious, to leave the society they belong to and enter into another. I cannot get comfortable. When men enter into society, it is by voluntary consent, and they have a right to demand and insist upon the performance of such conditions and previous limitations as form an equitable original compact. Every natural right, not expressly given up or, from the nature of a social compact, necessarily ceded, remains. All positive and civil laws should conform, as far as possible, to the law of natural reason and equity. As neither reason requires, nor religion permits the contrary, every man living in or out of a state of civil society has a right peaceably and quietly to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Just and true liberty, equal and impartial liberty, in matters spiritual and temporal, is a thing that all men are clearly entitled to by the eternal and immutable laws of God and nature, as well as by the laws of nations and all well-grounded and municipal laws, which must have their foundation in the former. In regard to religion, mutual tolerance in the different possessions thereof is what all good and candid minds in all ages have ever practiced, and both by precept and example inculcated on mankind. It is now generally agreed among Christians that this spirit of toleration, in the fullest extent consistent with the being of civil society, is the chief characteristical mark of the true church, insomuch that Mr. Locke has asserted and proved, beyond the possibility of contradiction on any solid ground, that such toleration ought to be extended to all those whose doctrines are not subversive of society. The only sects which he thinks ought to be, and which by all wise laws are, excluded from such toleration are those who teach doctrines subversive of the civil government under which they live. The Roman Catholics or Papists are excluded by reason of such doctrines as these: that princes excommunicated may be deposed, and those that they call heretics may be destroyed without mercy. Besides the recognizing the Pope in so absolute a manner in subversion of government, by introducing as far as possible into the states under whose protection they enjoy life, liberty, and property, that solecism in politics, imperium, imperio, leading directly to the worst anarchy and confusion, civil discord, war, and bloodshed. The natural liberty of man by entering into society is abridged or restrained, so far only as is necessary for the great end of society, the best good of the whole. In the state of nature, every man is, under God, judge and sole judge of his own rights and of the injuries done him, By entering into society, he agrees to an arbiter or indifferent judge between him and his neighbors. But he no more renounces his original right, thereby taking a cause out of the ordinary course of law and leaving the decision to referees or indifferent arbitrators. In the last case, he must pay the referee for time and trouble. He should also be willing to pay his just quota for the support of the government, the law, and the Constitution, the end of which is to furnish indifferent and impartial judges in all cases that may happen, whether civil, ecclesiastical, marine, or military. The natural liberty of man is to be free from any superior power on earth, and not to be under the will or legislative authority of man, but only to have the law of nature for his rule. In the state of nature, men may, as the patriarchs did, employ hired servants for the defense of their lives, liberties, and property, and they shall pay them reasonable wages. Government was instituted for the purpose of common defense, and those who hold the reins of government have an equitable natural right to an honorable support from the same principle that the laborer is worthy of his hire. But then the same community which they serve ought to be the assessors of their pay. Governors have a right to seek and take what they please. By this, instead of being content with the station assigned them, that of honorable servants of the society, they would soon become absolute masters, despots, and tyrants. Hence, as a private man has his right to say what wages he will give in his private affairs, so has a community to determine what they will give and grant their substance for the administration of public affairs. And in both cases, more are ready to offer their services at the proposed and stipulated prices than are able and willing to perform their duty. In short, it is the greatest absurdity to suppose it in the power of one or of any number of men at the entering into society to renounce their essential natural rights or the means of preserving those rights, when the grand end of civil government, from the very nature of its institution, is for the support, protection, and defense of those very rights, the principle of which, as is before observed, are life, liberty, and property. If men, through fear, fraud, or mistake, should in turns renounce, or give up any essential natural right, the eternal law of reason and the grand end of society would absolutely vacate such renunciation. The right of freedom being the gift of God Almighty, it is not in the power of man to alienate this gift and voluntarily become a slave. As Christians, these may be the best understood by reading and carefully studying the institutes of the great lawgiver and head of the Christian Church, which are to be found clearly written and promulgated in the New Testament. By an act of the British Parliament, commonly called the Toleration Act, every subject in England except Papists, etc., were restored to and re-established in his natural right to worship God, according to the dictates of his own conscience. And by the charter of this province, it is granted, ordained, and established that it is declared as an original right that there shall be liberty of conscience allowed in the worship of God to all Christians, except Papists, inhabiting or which shall inhabit or be resident within such province or territory. Magna Charta itself is in substance but a constrained declaration or proclamation and promulgation in the name of king, lords, and commons. Of the sense of the latter had their original, inherent, indefeasible, natural rights. Also those of free citizens equally perdurable with the other, that great author, that great jurist, and even that court writer. Mr. Justice Blackstone holds that this recognition was justly obtained of King John, sword in hand, and peradventure it must be one day, sword in hand, again rescued and preserved from total destruction and oblivion. As subjects, a commonwealth or state is a body politic, or civil society of men united together to promote their mutual safety and prosperity by means of their union. The absolute right of Englishmen and all freemen in out of civil society are principally personal security, personal liberty, and private property. All persons born in the British American colonies are, by the laws of God and nature, and by the common law of England, exclusive of all charges from the Crown, well entitled, and by acts of the British Parliament are declared to be entitled to all the natural, essential, inherent, and inseparable rights, liberties, and privileges of subjects born in Great Britain or within the realm. Among these rights are the following, which no man or body of men, consistently with their own rights as men and citizens or members of society, can for themselves give up or take away from others. First, the fundamental positive law of all commonwealth or states is the establishing of legislative power, as the first fundamental natural law also, which is to govern, even the legislative power itself, is the preservation of the society. Secondly, the legislative has no right to absolute arbitrary power over the lives and fortunes of the people, nor can mortals assume a prerogative not only too high for men, but for angels, and therefore reserved for the deity alone. The legislative cannot justly assume itself a power to rule by extempore arbitrary decrees, but it is bound to see that justice is dispensed, and that the rights of the subjects be decided by promulgated standing and known laws, and authorized independent judges, that is, independent as far as possible of prince and people. There should be one rule of justice for rich and poor, for the favorite at court and the countryman at the plough. Thirdly, the supreme power cannot justly take away from any man any part of his property without his consent in person or by his representative. These are some of the first principles of natural law and justice, and the great barriers of all free states, and of the British Constitution in particular. It is utterly irreconcilable to these principles and to any other fundamental maxims of the common law, common sense, and reason that a British House of Commons should have a right and pleasure to give and grant the property of the colonists, that the colonists are well entitled to all the essential rights, liberties, and privileges of men and freemen born in Britain is manifest not only from the colony charters in general, but acts of the British Parliament. The statute of the 13th of Geo II, Chapter 7, naturalizes every foreigner after 7 years' residence. The words of the Massachusetts Charter are these: and further, our will and pleasure is, and we do hereby for us, our heirs and successors, grant, establish, and ordain that all and every of the subjects of us, our heirs and successors, which shall go to and inhabit within our said province or territory, and every of their children which shall happen to be born there or on the seas and going thither or returning from thence, shall have and enjoy all liberties and immunities of free and natural subjects within any of the dominions of us, our heirs and successors, to all intents, constructions, and purposes whatsoever, as if they and every one of them were born within this, our realm of England. Now what liberty can there be where property is taken away without consent? Can it be said with any color of truth and justice that this continent of 3,000 miles in length, and of the breadth as yet unexplored, in which, however, it is supposed there are 5,000,000 of people, had the least voice, vote, or influence in the British Parliament? Have they altogether any more weight or power to return a single member to that House of Commons who have not inadvertently but deliberately assumed power to dispose of their lives, liberties, and properties, than to choose an emperor of China. Had the colonists the right to return members to the British Parliament, it would only be hurtful, as from their local situation and circumstances, it is impossible they should ever be truly and properly represented there. The inhabitants of this country, in all probability, in a few years, will be more numerous than those of Great Britain and Ireland together. Yet it is absurdly expected by the promoters of the present measure that those with their posterity to all generations should be easy, while their property shall be disposed of by a House of Commons at 3,000 miles distant from them, and who cannot be supposed to have the least care or concern for their real interests, but must be in effect bribed against it, as every burden they lay on their colonists is so much saved or gained to themselves. Hitherto, many... Quit it. They want me to go to bed. Hitherto, many of the colonists have been free from quit rents. But if the breath of that British House of Commons can originate an act for taking away all our money, our lands will go next, or be subject to rack rents from haughty and relentless landlords, who will ride at ease while we are trodden in the dirt. The colonists have been branded with the odious names of traitors and rebels only for complaining of their grievances. How long such treatment will or ought to be borne is submitted. Let's look up rack rents. Rack rents. An extortion or very high rent, especially an annual rent equivalent to the full value of the property to which it relates. I think we fucked up. As good as we're getting, we're forgetting some of these core tenets here, huh? You know? Meh. Meh. Rules by which a great empire may be reduced to a small one. Presented to a late minister when he entered upon his administration. Benjamin Franklin, 1773. An ancient sage boasted that, though he could not fiddle, he knew how to make a great city of a little one. The science that I, a modern simpleton, am about to communicate is the very reverse. I address myself to all ministers who have the management of extensive dominions, which from their very greatness are becoming troublesome to govern, because the multiplicity of their affairs leaves no time for fiddling. I address myself to all ministers who have the management of extensive dominions, which from their very greatness are becoming troublesome to govern, because the multiplicity of their affairs leaves no time for fiddling. In the first place, gentlemen, you are to consider that a great empire, like a great cake, is most easily diminished at the edges. Turn your attention, therefore, first to your remotest provinces, that as you get rid of the next may follow in order. That the probability of the separation may always exist. Take special care that the provinces are never incorporated with the mother country, that they do not enjoy the same common rights, the same privileges in commerce, and that they are governed by severer laws, all of your enacting, without allowing them any share in the choice of legislators. By carefully making and preserving such distinctions, you will, to keep to my simile of the cake, act like a wise gingerbread baker who, to facilitate a division, cuts his dough half through in those places where, when baked, he would have broken to pieces. Was this here or in Europe? Third, those remote provinces have perhaps been acquired, purchased, or conquered at the sole expense of the settlers or their ancestors without the aid of the mother country. If this should happen to increase her strength by their growing numbers, ready to join in her wars, her commerce, by their growing demand for her manufacturers, or her naval power, by great employment for her ships and seamen, they may probably suppose some merit in this, and that entitles them to some favor. You are therefore to forget it all or resent it, as if they had done you injury. If they happen to be zealous Whigs, friends of liberty, nurtured in revolution principles, remember all that to their prejudice, and resolve to punish it, for such principles, after a revolution is thoroughly established, are of no more use. They are even odious and abominable. Fourth, however, peaceably your colonies have submitted to your government, shown their affection to your interests, and patiently borne their grievances. You are to suppose them always inclined to revolt, and treat them accordingly. Quarter troops among them, who by their insolence may provoke the rising of mobs, and by their bullets and bayonets suppress them. By this means, like the husband who uses his wife ill from suspicion, you may in time convert your suspicions into realities. The fifth, remote provinces must have governors and judges to represent the royal person, and execute everywhere the delegated parts of his office and authority. You ministers know that much the strength of government depends on the opinion of the people, and much of that opinion on the choice of rulers placed immediately over them. If you send them wise and good men for governors who study the interests of the colonists and advance their prosperity, they will think their king wise and good, and that he wishes the welfare of his subjects. If you send them learned and upright men for judges, they will think him a lover of justice. This may attach your provinces more to his government. You are therefore to be careful whom you recommend for those offices. If you can find prodigals who have ruined their fortunes, broken gamesters, or stock jobbers, these may do well as governors, for they will probably be rapacious and provoke the people by their extortions. Wrangling proctors and pettifogging lawyers, too, are not amiss, for they will be forever disputing and quarreling with their little parliaments, if withal they should be ignorant, wrong-headed, and insolent. So much the better attorneys, clerk, and Newgate solicitors will do for chief justices, especially if they hold their places during your pleasure. And all will contribute to impress those ideas of your government that are proper for a people you would wish to renounce it. The sixth, to confirm these impressions and strike them deeper whenever the injured come to the capital with complaints of maladministration, oppression, or injustice, punish such suitors with long delay, enormous expense, and a final judgment in favor of the oppressor. This will have an admirable effect every way. The trouble of future complaints will be prevented, and governors and judges will be encouraged to farther acts of oppression and injustice, and thence the people may become more disaffected and at length desperate. 7. When such governors have crammed their coffers and made themselves so odious to the people that they can no longer remain among them with safety to their persons, recall, and reward them with pensions. You may make them baronets too, if that respectable order should not think fit to resent it. All will contribute to encourage new governors in the same practice and make the supreme government detestable. 7. If, when you are engaged in war, your colony should vie in liberal aids of men and money against the common enemy upon your simple requisition and give far beyond their abilities, reflect that a penny taken from them by your power is more honorable to you than a pound presented by their benevolence. Despise therefore their voluntary grants, and resolve to harass them with novel taxes. They will probably complain to your parliaments that they are taxed by a body in which they have no representative, and that this is a contrary to common right. They will petition for redress. Let the parliaments flout their claims, reject their positions, refuse even to suffer the reading of them, and treat the petitioners with the utmost contempt. Nothing can have a better effect in producing the alienation proposed, for though many can forgive injuries, none ever forgave contempt. 9. In laying these taxes, never regard the heavy burthens those remote people already undergo. In defending their own frontiers, supporting their own provincial governments, making new roads, building bridges, churches, and other public edifices, which in old countries have been done to your hands by your ancestors, but which occasion constant calls and demands on the purses of a new people. Forget the restraints you lie on their trade for your own benefit, and the disadvantage a monopoly of this trade gives your exacting merchants. Think nothing of the wealth those merchants and your manufacturers acquire by the colony commerce, their increased ability thereby to pay taxes at home, their accumulating in the price of their commodities most of those taxes, and so levying them from their consuming customers. All this, and the employment and support of thousands of your poor by the colonists, you are entirely to forget. But remember, to make your arbitrary tax more grievous to your provinces by public declarations importing that your power of taxing them has no limits, so that when you take from them, without their consent, 1 shilling in the pound, you have a clear right to the other 19. This will probably weaken every idea of security in their property, and convince them that under a government they have nothing they can call their own, which can scarce fail of producing the happiest consequences. 10. Possibly, indeed, some of them might still comfort themselves and say, though we have no property, we have yet something left that is valuable. We have constitutional liberty, both of person and of conscience. This king, these lords, and these commons, who it seems are too remote from us to know us and feel for us, cannot take from us our habeas corpus right, and our right of trial by a jury of our neighbors. They cannot deprive us of the exercise of our religion, alter our ecclesiastic constitution, and compel us to be papists, if they please, or Mahometans. I don't know what that is. To annihilate this comfort, begin by laws to perplex their commerce with infinite regulations, impossible to be remembered and observed. Ordain seizures of their property for every failure, take away the trial of such property by jury, and give it to the arbitrary judges of your own appointing, and of the lowest characters in the country, whose salaries and emoluments are to arise out of the duties or condemnations, and whose appointments are during pleasure. Then let there be a formal declaration of both houses that opposition to your edicts is treason, and that any person suspected of treason in the provinces may, according to some obsolete law, be seized and sent to the metropolis of the empire for trial, and pass an act that those there charged with certain other offenses shall be sent away in chains from their friends and country to be tried in the same manner for felony. Then erect a new court of inquisition among them, accompanied by an armed force, with instructions to transport all such persons to be ruined by the expense. If they ever bring over evidences to prove their innocence, or be found guilty and hanged, if they cannot afford it, And, lest the people should think you cannot possibly go any further, pass another solemn declaratory act, that king, lords, commons hath, and of right ought to have full power and authority to make statutes of sufficient force and validity to bind the unrepresented provinces in all cases whatsoever. This will include spiritual with temporal, and taken together must operate wonderfully to your purpose by convincing them that they are at present under power something like that spoken of in the scriptures, which can not only kill their bodies, but damn their souls to all eternity by compelling them, if it pleases, to worship the devil. 11. To make your taxes more odious, and more likely to procure resistance, send from the capital a board of officers to superintend the collection, composed of the most indiscreet, ill-bred, and insolent you can find. Let these have large salaries out of the extorted revenue, and live in open, grating luxury upon the sweat and blood of the industrious, whom they are to worry continually with groundless and expensive prosecutions before the above-mentioned arbitrary revenue judges, all at the cost of the party prosecuted, though acquitted, because the king is to pay no costs. Let these men, by your order, be exempted from all common taxes and burthens of the province, though they and their property are protected by its laws. If any revenue officers are suspected of the least tenderness for the people, discard them. If others are justly complained of, protect and reward them. If any of the under officers behave so as to provoke the people to drub them, promote those to better offices. This will encourage others to procure for themselves such profitable drubbings, by multiplying and enlarging such provocations, and all will work towards the end you aim at. 12. Another way to make your tax odious is to misapply the produce of it. It was originally appropriated for the defense of the provinces, the better support of government, and the administration of justice where it may be necessary. Then apply none of it to that of defense, but bestow it where it is not necessary, in augmented salaries or pensions to every governor who has distinguished himself by his enmity to the people and by calumniating them to their sovereign. This will make them pay it more unwillingly, and be more apt to quarrel with those that collect it, and those that imposed it, who will quarrel again with them, and all shall contribute to your main purpose of making them weary of your government. 13. If the people of any province have been accustomed to support their own governors and judges to his satisfaction, you are to apprehend that such governors and judges may be thereby influenced to treat the people kindly and to do them justice. This is another reason for applying part of that revenue in larger salaries to such governors and judges, given as their commissions are, during your pleasure only, forbidding them to take any salaries from their provinces, that thus the people may no longer hope any kindness from their governors, or, in crown cases, any justice from their judges. And as the money thus misapplied in one province is extorted from all, probably all will resent the misapplication. 14. If the parliaments of your provinces should dare to claim the rights or complain of your administration, order them to be harassed with repeated dissolutions. If the same men are continually returned by new elections, adjourn their meetings to some country village where they cannot be accommodated, and there keep them during pleasure. For this, you know, is your prerogative, and an excellent one it is, as you may manage it to promote discontents among the people, diminish their respect, and increase their disaffection. 15. Convert the brave, honest officers of your navy into pimping tide waiters and colony officers of the customs. Let those who in time of war fought gallantly in defense of the commerce of their countrymen in peace be taught to prey upon it. Let them learn to be corrupted by great and real smugglers, but to show their diligence, scour with armed boats every bay, harbor, river, creek, cove, or nook throughout the coast of your colonies. Stop and detain every coaster, every wood boat, every fisherman, tumble their cargoes and even their ballast inside out and upside down. And if a pennorth of pins is found unentered, let the whole be seized and confiscated. Thus shall the trade of your colonists suffer more from their friends in time of peace than it did from their enemies in war. and let these boats' crews land upon every farm in their way, rob the orchards, steal the pigs and the poultry, and insult the inhabitants. If the injured and exasperated farmers, unable to procure other justice, should attack the aggressors, drub them, and burn their boats, you are to call this high treason and rebellion, order fleets and armies into their country, and threaten to carry all the offenders 3,000 miles to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. Oh, this'll work admirably. 16. If you are told of discontents in your colonies, never believe that they are general or that you have given occasion for them. Therefore, do not think of applying any remedy or of changing any offensive measure. Redress no grievances, lest they should be encouraged to demand the redress of some other grievance. Grant no request that is just and reasonable, lest they should make another that is unreasonable. Take all your informations of the state of the colonies from your governors and officers in enmity with them. Encourage and reward these leasing makers, secrete their lying accusations, lest they should be confuted. But act upon them as the clearest evidence, and believe nothing you hear from the friends of the people. Suppose all their complaints to be invented and promoted by a few fascist demagogues, whom if you could catch and hang, all would be quiet. Catch and hang a few of them accordingly, and the blood of the martyrs shall work miracles in favor of your purpose. 17. If you see ritual nations rejoicing at the prospect of your disunion with your provinces, and endeavoring to promote it, if they translate, publish, and applaud all the complaints of your discontented colonists, at the same time privately stimulating you to severer measures, let not that alarm offend you. Why should it, since you all mean the same thing? 18. If any colony should at their own charge erect a fortress to secure their port against the fleets of a foreign enemy, get your governor to betray that fortress into your hands. Never think of paying what it costs the country, for that would look at least like some regard for justice, but turn it into a citadel to awe the inhabitants and curb their commerce. If they should have lodged in such fortress their very arms they brought and used to aid you in your conquest, seize them all. It will provoke like ingratitude added to robbery. One admirable effect of these operations will be to discourage every other colony from erecting such defenses, and so your enemies may more easily invade them, to the great disgrace of your government, and of course the furtherance of your project. 19. Send armies into their country under pretense of protecting the inhabitants, but instead garrisoning the forts on their frontiers with those troops to prevent incursions, demolish those forts, and order the troops into the heart of the country, that the savages may be encouraged to attack the frontiers, and that the troops may be protected from by the inhabitants. This will seem to proceed from your ill will or your ignorance, and contribute further to produce strength and opinion among them, that you are no longer fit to govern them. 20. Lastly, invest the general of your army in the provinces with great and unconstitutional powers, and free him from the control of even your own civil governors. Let him have troops and now under his command, with all the fortresses in his possession, and who knows, but like some provincial generals in the Roman Empire, and encouraged by the universal discontent you have produced, he may take it into his head to set up for himself, if he should, and you have carefully practiced these few excellent rules of mine, take my word for it, all the provinces will immediately join him, and you will that day, if you have not done it sooner, get rid of the trouble of governing them, and all the plagues attending their commerce, in connection from henceforth and forever. God damn. He was a sarcastic son of a bitch, wasn't he? Fuck. A summary view of the rights of British America, set forth in some resolutions intended for the present delegates of the people of Virginia, now in Convention 1774. Thomas Jefferson. Resolved, that it be an instruction to the said deputies, when assembled in General Congress, with the deputies from other states of British America, to propose to the said Congress that an humble and dutiful address be presented to His Majesty, begging leave to lay before him, as Chief Magistrate of the British Empire, the united complaints of His Majesty's subjects in America, complaints which are excited by many unwarrantable encroachments and usurpations, attempted to be made by the legislature of one part of the empire, upon those rights which God and the laws have given equally and independently to all, to represent to His Majesty that these his states have often individually made humble application to His imperial throne, to obtain through its intervention some redress of their injured rights, to none of which was ever even an answer condescended humbly to hope, that this their joints address, penned in the language of truth, and divested of those expressions of servility which would persuade His Majesty that we are asking favors and not rights, shall obtain from His Majesty a more respectful acceptance. And this His Majesty will think we have reason to expect, when he reflects that he is no more than the chief officer of the people, appointed by the laws, and circumscribed with definite powers to assist in working the great machine of government, erected for their use, and consequently subject to their superintendence. And in the order, these are rights, as well as the invasions of them, may be laid more fully bare before His Majesty, to take view of them from the origin and from the settlement of these countries, to remind him that our ancestors before their emigration to America were the free inhabitants of the British dominions in Europe, and possessed a right which nature has given to all men, of departing from the country in which chance, not choice, has placed them, of going in quest of new habitations, and of their establishing new societies under such laws and regulations as to them shall seem most likely to promote public happiness, that their Saxon ancestors had, under this universal law, in like manner left their native wilds and woods in the north of Europe, had possessed themselves of the island of Britain, then less charged with inhabitants, and had established there that system of laws which has so long been the glory and protection of that country. Nor was ever any claim of superiority or dependence asserted over them by that mother country from which they had migrated, and were such a claim made, it is believed that His Majesty's subjects in Great Britain have too firm a feeling of the rights derived to them from their ancestors to bow down the sovereignty to their state before such visionary pretenses. And it is thought that no circumstance has occurred to distinguish materially I turned that off. And it is thought that no circumstances has occurred to distinguish materially the British from the Saxon emigration. America was conquered, and her settlements made and firmly established, at the expense of individuals and not of the British public. Their own blood was spilt in acquiring lands for their settlement, their own fortunes expended in making that settlement effectual. For themselves they fought, for themselves they conquered, and for themselves alone they have right to hold. Not a shilling was ever issued from the public treasures of His Majesty, or his ancestors, for their assistance till of very late times after the colonies had become established on a firm and permanent footing, that then, indeed, having become valuable to Great Britain for her commercial purposes, his Parliament was pleased to lend them assistance against an enemy who would fain have drawn to herself the benefits of their commerce. To the great aggrandizement of herself and danger of Great Britain, such assistance and in such circumstances they had often before given to Portugal and other allied states, with whom they carry on a commercial intercourse. Yet these states never supposed that by calling in her aid, they thereby submitted themselves to her sovereignty. Had such terms been proposed, they would have rejected them with disdain, and trusted for better to the moderation of their enemies. or to vigorous exertion of their own force. We do not, however, mean to underrate those aids which to us were doubtless valuable, on whatever principles granted, but we should shew that they cannot give a title to the authority which the British Parliament would arrogate over us, and that they may amply be repaid by giving our inhabitants of Great Britain such exclusive privileges in trade as may be advantageous to them, and at the same time not too restrictive to ourselves. That settlements having been thus effected in the wilds of America, the emigrants thought proper to adopt that system of laws under which they had hitherto lived in the mother country, and to continue their union with her by submitting themselves to the same common sovereign, who was thereby made the central link connecting the several parts of the empire thus newly multiplied. But that not long were they permitted, however far they thought themselves removed from the hand of oppression, to hold undisturbed the rights thus acquired, at the hazard of their lives and loss of their fortunes. A family of princes was then on the British throne, whose treasonable crimes against their people brought on them afterwards the exertion of those sacred and sovereign rights of punishment reserved in the hands of the people for cases of extreme necessity, and judged by the Constitution unsafe to be delegated. Yeah. Oh, I might not make it to DeathStranding tonight. That's fine for me. Well, every day brought forth some new and unjustifiable exertion of the power over their subjects on that side of the water. It was not to be expected that those here, much less able at the time to oppose the designs of despotism, should be exempted from injury. Accordingly, that their country, which had been acquired by the lives, the labors, and the fortunes of individual adventurers, was by these princes at several times parted out and distributed among the favorites and followers of their fortunes, and by an assumed right of the crown alone were erected into distinct and independent governments, a measure which it is believed His Majesty's prudence and understanding would prevent him from imitating at this day. As no exercise of such power of dividing and dismembering a country has ever occurred in His Majesty's realm of England, though now of very ancient standing, nor could it be justified or acquiesced under there, or in any other part of His Majesty's empire. That the exercise of a free trade with all parts of the world possessed by the American colonists as of natural right, and which no law of their own had taken away or abridged, was the next object of unjust encroachment. Some of the colonies, having thought proper to continue the administration of their government in the name and under the authority of His Majesty King Charles I, whom notwithstanding his late deposition by the Commonwealth of England, they continued in the sovereignty of their state, the Parliament for the Commonwealth, took the same in high offense, and assumed upon themselves the power of prohibiting their trade with all other parts of the world, except the island of Great Britain. This arbitrary act, however, they soon recalled and by solemn treaty entered into on the 12th day of March, 1651, between the said Commonwealth by their commissioners and the colony of Virginia by their houses of Burgess. It was expressly stipulated by the 8th article of the treaty that they should have free trade as the people of England do enjoy to all places, and with all nations according to the laws of that Commonwealth, but that upon the restoration of His Majesty King Charles II, their rights of free commerce fell once more a victim to arbitrary power, and by several acts of his reign, as well as of some of his successors, the trade of the colonies was laid under such restrictions as to what hopes they might form from the justice of a British Parliament, were its uncontrolled it's spelled weird. Power admitted over these states. It's spelled with a U. History has informed us that bodies of men, as well as individuals, are susceptible of the spirit of tyranny. A view of these acts of Parliament for regulation, as it has been affectedly called, of the American trade, if all other evidence were removed out of the case, would undeniably evince the truth of this observation. Besides the duties they impose on our articles of export and import, they prohibit our going to any markets northward of Cape Finisterre and the Kingdom of Spain for the sale of commodities which water. In the Kingdom of Spain, for the sake of commodities which Great Britain will not take from us, and for the purchase of others which she cannot supply us, and that for no other than the arbitrary purposes of purchasing for themselves, by a sacrificing of our rights and interests, certain privileges in their commerce with an allied state, who, in confidence that their exclusive trade with America will be continued, while the principles and power of the British Parliament by the same have indulged themselves in every exorbitance which their avarice could dictate, or our necessities extort, have raised their commodities, called for in America, to the double and treble of what they sold for before such exclusive privileges were given them, and of what better commodities of the same kind would cost us elsewhere, and at the same time give us much less for what we carry thither than might be had at more convenient ports. That these acts prohibit us from carrying in quest of other purchasers the surplus of our tobaccos remaining after the consumption of Great Britain is supplied, so that we must leave them with the British merchant for whatever he will please to allow us, to be by him reshipped to foreign markets, where he will reap the benefits of making sale of them for full value. That to heighten still the idea of parliamentary justice, and to shew with what moderation they are like to exercise power, where themselves are to feel no part of its weight, we take leave to mention to his Majesty certain other acts of British Parliament, which they would I'm at the end of my rope. That to heighten still the idea of parliamentary justice, and to shew with what moderation they are like to exercise power, where themselves are to feel no part of its weight, we take leave to mention to his Majesty certain other acts of British Parliament, by which they would prohibit us from manufacturing for our own use the articles we raise on our own lands with our own labor. By an act passed in the 5th year of the reign of his late Majesty King George II, an American subject is forbidden to make a hat for himself of the fur which he has taken, perhaps, on his own soil. An instant of despotism, to which no parallel can be produced in the most arbitrary ages of British history. By one other act, passed in the 23rd year of the same reign, the iron which we make, we are forbidden to manufacture. And heavy as that article is, and necessary to every branch of husbandry, besides commission and insurance, we are to pay freight for it to Great Britain, and freight for it back again, for the purpose of supporting not men, but machines, in the island of Great Britain. In the same spirit of equal and impartial legislation is to be viewed the Act of Parliament passed in the 5th year of the same reign, by which American lands are made subject to the demands of British creditors, while their own lands were still continued unanswerable for their debts. From which one of these conclusions must necessarily follow: either that justice is not the same in America as in Britain, or else the British Parliament pay less regard to it here than there, but that we do not point out to his Majesty the injustice of these acts, with intent to rest on the principle of the cause of their nullity, but to shew that experience confirms the propriety of those political principles, which exempt us from the jurisdiction of the British Parliament. The true ground on which we declare these acts void is that the British Parliament has no right to exercise authority over us, that these exercises of usurped power have not been confined to instances alone in which themselves were interested, but they have also intermeddled with the regulation of the internal affairs of the colonies. The Act of the 9th and for establishing a post office in America seems to have had little connection with British convenience, except that of accommodating His Majesty's ministers and favorites with the sale of a lucrative and easy office. That thus have we hastened through the reigns which preceded His Majesty's, during which the violations of our right were less alarming, because repeated at more distant intervals than that rapid and bold succession of injuries which is likely to distinguish the present from all other periods of American story. Scarcely have our minds been able to emerge from the astonishment into which one stroke of parliamentary thunder has involved us, before another more heavy and more alarming has fallen on us. A single act of tyranny may be ascribed to the accidental opinion of a day, but a series of oppressions, begun at distinguished period, and pursued unalterably through every change of ministers, too plainly to prove a deliberate and systematical plan of reducing us to slavery. That the act passed in the 4th year of His Majesty's reign, entitled An Act for Granting Certain Duties in the British Colonies, Plantations in America, and etc. One other act passed in the 5th year of his reign, entitled An Act for Granting and Applying Certain Stamp Duties and Other Duties in the British Colonies and Plantations in America. One other act passed in the 6th year of his reign, entitled An Act for the Better Securing the Independency of His Majesty's Dominions in America upon the Crown and Parliament of Great Britain. And one other act passed in the 7th year of his reign, entitled An Act for Granting Duties on Paper, Tea, etc. Form that connected chain of parliamentary usurpation, which has already been subject to frequent applications to His Majesty and the Houses of Lords and the Commons of Great Britain. Hang on, dude. What it? And Commons of Great Britain, and no answers have yet been condescended to any of these. We shall not trouble His Majesty with the repetition of the matters they contain. But that one other act, passed in the same 7th year of the reign, having been a peculiar attempt, must ever require peculiar mention. It is entitled An Act for Suspending the Legislature of New York. One free and independent legislature hereby takes upon itself to suspend the powers of another, free and independent as itself, thus exhibiting a phenomenon unknown in nature, the creator and creature of its own power. Not only the principles of common sense, but the common feelings of human nature must be surrendered up before His Majesty's subjects here can be persuaded to believe that they hold their political existence at the will of a British Parliament. Shall these governments be dissolved, their property annihilated, and their people reduced to a state of nature, at the imperious breath of a body of men, whom they never saw, in whom they never confided, and over whom they have no power of punishment or removal, let their crimes against the American public be ever so great? Can any one reason be assigned why 160,000 electors in the island of Great Britain should give law to 4 millions in the state of America, every individual of whom is equal to every individual of them, in virtue, in understanding, and in bodily strength? Were this to be admitted, instead of being free people, as we have hitherto supposed, and mean to continue ourselves, we should suddenly be found the slaves, not of one, but of 160,000 tyrants, distinguished too from all others by the singular circumstance that they are removed from the reach of fear, the only restraining motive which may hold the hand of a tyrant, that by an act to discontinue in such manner, and for such time as are therein mentioned, the landing and discharging, lading or shipping of goods, wares, and merchandise, at the town and within the harbor of Boston, in the province of Massachusetts Bay, in North America, which was passed at the last session of the British Parliament, a large and populous town whose trade was their sole subsistence, was deprived of that trade and involved in utter ruin. Let us for a while suppose the question of right suspended, in order to examine this act on principles of justice. An act of Parliament has been passed imposing duties on teas to be paid in America, against which act the Americans had protested as inauthoritative. The East India Company, who till that time had never sent a pound of tea to America on their own account, stepped forth on that occasion, the assertors of parliamentary right, and sent hither many ships load of that obnoxious commodity. The masters of their several vessels, however, on their arrival in America, wisely attended to admonition and returned with their cargoes. In the province of New England alone, the remonstrances of the people were disregarded, and a compliance, after being many days waited for, was flatly refused. Whether in this the master of the vessel was governed by his obstinacy or his instructions, let those who know say, there are extraordinary situations which require extraordinary interposition, and exasperated people who feel that they possess power are not easily restrained within limits strictly regular. A number of them assembled in the town of Boston, threw the tea into the ocean, and dispersed without doing any other acts of violence. If in this they did wrong, they were known and were amenable to the laws of the land, against which it could not be objected that they had ever, in any instance, been obstructed or diverted from their regular course in favor of the popular offenders. They should therefore not have been distrusted on this occasion, but that ill-fated colony had formerly been bold in their enmities against the house of Stuart, and were now devoted to ruin by that unseen hand which governs the momentous affair of this great empire. On the partial representations of a few worthless ministerial dependents, whose constant office it has been to keep that government embroiled, and who by their treacheries hope to obtain the dignity of the British knighthood, without calling for a pari accused, without asking a proof, without attempting to distinguish between the guilty and the innocent, the whole of that ancient and wealthy town is in a moment reduced from opulence to beggary. Men who had spent their lives in extending the British commerce, who had invested in that place the wealth their honest endeavors had merited, found themselves and their families thrown at once on the world for subsistence by its charities. Not the 100th part of the inhabitants of that town had been concerned in the act complained of. Many of them were in Great Britain, and in other parts beyond the sea, yet all were involved in one indiscriminate ruin, by a new executive power unheard of till then, that of a British Parliament, a property of a value of many millions of money, sacrificed in revenge, could not repay the loss of a few thousands. This is administering justice with a heavy hand indeed. And when is this tempest to be arrested in its course? 2 wharfs are to be opened again when His Majesty shall think proper. The residue which line the extensive shores of the Bay of Boston are forever interdicted the exercise of commerce. This little exception seems to have been thrown in for no other purpose than that of setting a precedent for investing His Majesty with legislative powers. If the pulse of his people shall beat calmly under this experiment, another and another will be tried, till the measure of despotism be filled up. It would be an insult on common sense to pretend that this exception was made in order to restore its commerce to that great town. The trade which cannot be received at two wharfs alone must of necessity be transferred to some other place, to which it will soon be followed that of the two wharfs. Considered in this light, it would be an insolent and cruel mockery at the annihilation of the town of Boston. By the Act for the Suppression of Riots and Tumults in the town of Boston, passed also in the last session of Parliament, a murder committed there is, if the governor pleases, to be tried in the court of King's Bench, in the island of Great Britain, by a jury of Middlesex. The witnesses too, on receipt of such a sum as the governor shall think it reasonable for them to expend, are to enter into recognizance to appear at the trial. This is, in other words, taxing them to the amount of their recognizance, and that amount may be whatever governor pleases. For who does his majesty think can be prevailed on to cross the Atlantic for the sole purpose of bearing evidence to a fact? His expenses are to be borne, indeed, as they shall be estimated by a governor, but who are to feed the wife and children whom he leaves behind, and who have no other subsistence but his daily labor. Those epidemical disorders, too, so terrible in a foreign climate, is the cure of them to be estimated among the articles of expense, and their danger to be warded off by the almighty power of Parliament. And the wretched criminal, if he happen to have offended on the American side, stripped of his privilege of trial by peers, of his vicinage, removed from the place where a loan full of evidence could be obtained, without money, without counsel, without friends, without exculpatory proof, is tried before judges predetermined to condemn. The cowards who would suffer a countryman to be torn from the bowels of their society, in order to be thus offered a sacrifice to parliamentary tyranny, would merit that everlasting infamy now fixed on the authors of the act. A clause for a similar purpose had been introduced into an act passed in the 12th year of His Majesty's reign, entitled, An Act for the better securing and preserving His Majesty's dockyards, magazines, ships, ammunition, and stores, against which, as meriting the same censures, the several colonies have already protested, that these are the acts of power assumed by a body of men, foreign to our constitutions and unacknowledged by our laws, against which we do, on behalf of the inhabitants of British America, enter this our solemn and determined protest, and we do earnestly entreat His Majesty, as yet the only mediatory power between the several states of the British Empire, to recommend to his Parliament of Great Britain the total revocation of these acts, which, however nugatory they be, may yet prove the cause of further discontents and jealousies among us. That we next proceed to consider the conduct of His Majesty, as holding the executive powers of the laws of these states, and mark out his deviations from the line of duty. By the Constitution of the Great Britain, as well as of the several American states, His Majesty possesses the power of refusing to pass into law any bill which has already passed the other two branches of legislature. His Majesty, however, and his ancestors, conscious of the impropriety of opposing their single opinion to the united wisdom of the two houses of Parliament, while their proceedings were unbiased by interested principles, for several ages past, have modestly declined the exercise of his power, and that part of his empire called Great Britain. But by the change of circumstances, other principles than those of justice simply have obtained an influence on their determinations. The addition of new states to the British Empire has produced an addition of new, and sometimes opposite interests. It is now, therefore, the great office of His Majesty to resume the exercise of his negative powers, and to prevent the passage of laws by any one legislature of the empire, which might bear injuriously
on the rights and interests of another. Yet this will not excuse the wanton exercise of this power which we have seen His Majesty practice on the laws of American legislatures. For the most trifling reasons, and sometimes for no conceivable reason at all, His Majesty has rejected laws of the most salutary tendency. The abolition of domestic slavery is the great object of desire in those colonies, where it was unhappily introduced in their infant state. But previous to the enfranchisement of the slaves we have, it is necessary to exclude all further importations from Africa. Yet our repeated attempts to effect this by prohibitions and by imposing duties which might amount to a prohibition have been hitherto defeated by His Majesty's negative, thus preferring the immediate advantages of a few African corsairs to the lasting interest of the American states, and to the rights of human nature deeply wounded by this infamous practice. Nay, the single interposition of an interested individual against the law was scarcely ever known to fail of success, though in the opposite scale were placed the interests of a whole country. That this is so shameful an abuse of a power trusted with His Majesty for other purposes, as if not reformed, would call for some legal restrictions. With equal inattention to the necessities of His people here, as His Majesty permitted our laws to lie neglected in England for years, neither confirming them by His assent, nor annulling them by His negative, so that such of them as have no suspending clause we hold on the most precarious of all tenures. His Majesty's will, and such of them as suspended themselves till His Majesty's assent be obtained, we have feared might be called into existence at some future and distant period, when time and change of circumstances shall have rendered them destructive to His people here, and to render this grievance still more oppressive, His Majesty by His instructions has laid His governors under such restrictions, that they can pass no law of any moment, unless it have such suspending clause, so that, however immediate may be the call for legislative interposition, the law can not be executed till it has twice crossed the Atlantic, by which time the evil may have spent its whole force. But in what terms... How long is this? That's a lot. But in what terms, reconcilable to majesty and at the same time to truth, shall we speak of a late instruction to His Majesty's governor of the colony of Virginia, by which he is forbidden to assent to any law for the division of a country, unless the new country will consent to have no representative in assembly. That colony has, as yet, fixed no boundary to the westward. Their western countries, therefore, are of indefinite extent. Some of them are actually seated many hundred miles from their eastern limits. Is it possible, then, that His Majesty can have bestowed a single thought on the situation of those people, who, in order to obtain justice for injuries, however great or small, must, by the laws of that colony, attend their country court at such a distance, with all their witnesses, monthly, till their litigation be determined? Or does His Majesty seriously wish, and publish it to the world, that his subjects should give up the glorious right of representation, with all the benefits derived from that, and submit themselves the absolute slaves of his sovereign will? Or is it rather meant to confine the legislative body to their present numbers, that they may be cheaper bargain whenever they shall become worth a purchase? One of the articles of impeachment against Tressilian and the other judges of Westminster Hall, in the reign of Richard II, for which they suffered death, as traitors in their country, was that they had advised the king that he might dissolve his parliament at any time, and succeeding kings have adopted the opinion of these unjust judges. Since the establishment, however, of the British Constitution, at the glorious revolution. On its free and ancient principles, neither His Majesty nor his ancestors have exercised such a power of dissolution in the island of Great Britain. And when His Majesty was petitioned by the united voice of his people there to dissolve the present Parliament, who had become obnoxious to them, his ministers were heard to declare in open Parliament that His Majesty possessed no such power by the Constitution. But how different their language and his practice here! To declare, as their duty required, the known rights of their country to oppose the usurpations of every foreign judicature, to disregard the imperious mandates of a minister or governor, have been the avowed causes of dissolving houses of representatives in America. But if such powers be really vested in His Majesty, can he suppose they are there placed to all the members from such purposes as these? When the representative body have lost their confidence in their constituents, when they have notoriously made sale of their most valuable rights, when they have assumed to themselves power which the people never put in their hands, then, indeed, their continuing in office becomes dangerous to the state, and calls for an exercise of the power of dissolution. Such being the causes for which the representative body should, and should not, be dissolved, will it not appear strange to an unbiased observer that of Great Britain was not dissolved, while those of the colonies have been repeatedly incurred that sentence? But your Majesty, or your governors, have carried this power beyond every limit known, or provided for by the laws. After dissolving one House of Representatives, they have refused to call another, so that for a great length of time the legislature provided by the laws has been out of existence. From the nature of things, every society must at all times possess within itself the sovereign powers of legislation. The feelings of human nature revolt against the supposition of a state so situated as that it may not, in any emergency, provide against dangers which perhaps threaten immediate ruin, while those bodies are in existence to whom the people have delegated the powers of legislation they alone possess, and many exercise those powers. But when they are dissolved by the lopping off of one or more of their branches, the power reverts to the people, who may exercise it to unlimited extent, either assembling together in person, sending deputies, or in any other way they may think proper. We forbear to trace consequences further. The dangers are conspicuous with which this practice is replete. That we shall at this time take note of an error in the nature of our land holdings, which crept in at a very early period of our settlement, the introduction of the feudal tenures into the kingdom of England, though antient, is well enough understood to set this matter in proper light. In the earlier ages of the Saxon settlement, feudal holdings were certainly altogether unknown, and very few, if any, had been introduced at the time of the Norman conquest. Our Saxon ancestors held their lands, as they did their personal property, in absolute dominion, disencumbered without any superior, answering nearly to the nature of those possessions which the feudalists term allodial. William the Norman first introduced that system generally. The lands which had belonged to those who fell in the Battle of Hastings, and in the subsequent insurrections of his reign, formed a considerable portion of the land of the whole kingdom. These he granted out, subject to feudal duties, as did he also those of a great number of his new subjects, whom, by persuasions or threats, were induced to surrender them for that purpose. But still, much was left in the hands of his Saxon subjects, held of no superior and not subject to feudal conditions. These, therefore, by express laws enacted to render uniform the system of military defense, were made liable to the same military duties as if they had been feuds, and the Norman lawyers soon found means to saddle them also with all the other feudal burthens. But still they had not been surrendered to the king. They were not derived from his grant, and therefore they were not holden to him. A general principle, indeed, was introduced that all lands in England were held either immediately or immediately of the crown. But this was borrowed from those holdings, which were truly feudal and only applied to others for the purposes of illustration. Feudal holdings were, therefore, but exceptions out of the Saxon laws of possession under which all lands were held in absolute right. These, therefore, still form the basis or groundwork of the common law, to prevail wheresoever the exceptions have not taken place. America was not conquered by William the Norman, nor its lands surrendered to him, or any of his successors. Possessions there are undoubtedly of the alloidial nature. Our ancestors, however, who migrated hither, were farmers, not lawyers. The fictitious principle that all lands belong originally to the king, they were easily persuaded to believe real, and accordingly took grants of their own lands from the crown. And while the crown continued to grant for small sums and on reasonable rents, there was no inducement to arrest the error and lay it open to public view, but his majesty has lately taken on him to advance the terms of purchase, and of holding to the double of what they were, by which means the acquisition of lands being rendered difficult, the population of our country is likely to be checked. It is time, therefore, for us to lay this matter before his majesty. And to declare that he has no right to grant lands of himself, from the nature and purpose of civil institutions. All the lands within the limits which any particular society has circumscribed around itself are assumed by that society and subject to their allotment only. This may be done by themselves, assembled collectively, or by their legislature, to whom they may have delegated sovereign authority. And if they are allotted in neither of these ways, each individual of the society may appropriate to himself such lands as he finds vacant, and occupancy will give him title. That, in order to enforce the arbitrary measures before complained of, his majesty has from time to time sent among us large bodies of armed forces, not made up of the people here, nor raised by the authority of our laws, did his majesty possess such a right as this. He might swallow up all our other rights whenever he should think proper, but his majesty has no right to land a single armed man on our shores, and those whom he sends here are liable to our laws made for the suppression and punishments of riots, routs, and unlawful assemblies, or our hostile bodies invading us in defiance of law. When, in the course of the late war, it became expedient that a body of Hanoverian troops should be brought over for the defense of the Great Britain, his majesty's grandfather, our late sovereign, did not pretend to introduce them under any authority he possessed. Such a measure would have given just alarm to his subjects in Great Britain. Those liberties would not be safe. If armed men of another country and of another spirit might be brought into the realm at any minute, without the consent of their legislature, he therefore applied to Parliament, who passed an act for that purpose, limiting the number to be brought in, and the time they were to continue. In like manner is his majesty restrained in every part of the empire. He possesses indeed the executive power of the laws in every state. But they are the laws of the particular state, which he is to administer within that state, and not those of any one within the limits of another.
Every state must judge for itself the number of armed men which they may safely trust among them, of whom they are to consist, and under what restrictions they shall be laid. To render these proceedings still more criminal against our laws, instead of subjecting the military to the civil powers, His Majesty had expressly made the civil subordinate to the military. But can His Majesty thus put down all laws under his feet? Can he erect a power superior to that which he erected himself? He has done it indeed by force. But let him remember that force cannot give right, that these are our grievances, which we have thus laid before His Majesty with that freedom of language and sentiment which becomes a free people claiming their rights, as derived from the laws of nature, and not as the gift of their chief magistrate. Let those flatter who fear. It is not an American art.
Definitely tired.
To give praise which is not due, might as well from the venal, but would ill beseem those who are asserting the right of human nature. They know, and will therefore say, that kings are the servants, not the proprietors of the people. Open your breast, sire, to liberal and expanding thought. Let not the name of George III be a blot in the page of history. You are surrounded by British counselors, but remember that they are parties. You have no ministers for American affairs, because you have none taken from among us, nor amenable to the laws on which they are to give your advice. It behooves you, therefore, to think and to act for yourself, and your people. The great principles of right and wrong are legible to every reader. To pursue them requires not the aid of many counselors. The whole art of government consists in the art of being honest. Only aim to do your duty, and mankind will give you credit where you fail. No longer persevere in sacrificing the rights of one part of the empire to the inordinate desires of another, but deal out to all equal and impartial rights. Let no act be passed by any one legislature which may infringe on the rights and liberties of another. This is the important post in which fortune has placed you, holding the balance of a great, if a well-poised, empire. Thus, sire, is the advice of your great American council, on the observance of which may perhaps depend your felicity and future fame, and the preservation of that harmony which alone can continue both to Great Britain and America, the reciprocal advantages of their connection. It is neither our wish nor our interest to separate from her. We are willing, on our part, to sacrifice everything which reason can ask, to the restoration of that tranquility for which all must wish. On their part, let them be ready to establish union and a generous plan. Let them name their terms, but let them be just. Except of every commercial preference, it is in our power to give for such things as we can raise for their use, or they make for ours. But let them not think to exclude us from going to other markets to dispose of those commodities which they cannot use, or to supply those wants which they cannot supply. Still less, let it be proposed that our properties within our own territories shall be taxed or regulated by any power on earth but our own. The God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. The hand of force may destroy, but cannot destroy them. This, sire, is our determined resolution, and that you will be pleased to interpose with that efficacy which your earnest endeavors may ensure to procure redress of these our great grievances, to quiet the minds of your subjects in British America against any apprehension of future encroachment, to establish fraternal love and harmony, through the whole empire, and that these may continue to the latest ages of time, is the fervent prayer of all British America. It's like a 20th of the way through. So much. Oh, maybe I'll continue it next week. I have a few more codes to dispose of. Not games, but their packages. As with the other ones, whoever gets them first gets them. Wow, I'm more tired than I thought I would be. Well, anyway. Good night. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you later.